Right, we will make a start. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fifth event in the series Towards Another Architecture, which is organised by the Farrell Centre, a new public centre for architecture and cities in Newcastle in the UK, in collaboration with the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape at Newcastle University. The starting point for the series is the realisation that it is now 100 years since the first essays that would later form Le Corbusier's Vers une Architecture were published in the magazine L'Esprit Nouveau. Modern life demands and is waiting for a new kind of plan, both for the house and the city, Le Corbusier wrote. And today, we live at another pivotal moment for architecture and for the wider world. And this series emerges from the contention that what we need to make sense of this moment is not a new architecture, as Le Corbusier was popularly mistranslated as advocating, but another one, an architecture that is not bound to a single vision or idea, but is diverse, pluralist, and sustains multiple conversations about the active role that architects might play in the world. So the series of events invites a number of practitioners and thinkers working in a range of fields and geographies to reflect on this pivotal moment and put forward their visions for another architecture. The format is 30 minutes presentation followed by 30 minutes Q&A. So please have your questions ready, and when the time comes, submit them via the chat and we will try to go to you directly. Last week, we heard from Professor Ruth Morrow at Newcastle University, who explored her research around developing new biomaterials and the new forms of collaboration that are required and also which ensue from those processes. This evening, I'm delighted to introduce Paradigma Ariadné, a Budapest-based design studio who create architecture and related content through applying theory, imagination, and narration-based design processes. They've worked for individuals, institutions, companies, and governments, and their work has been displayed in Europe and the US. And just last year, they co-curated the Hungarian Pavilion, the Venice Architecture Biennale with Daniel Kovacs. The studio was founded in 2016 by Attila Robert Shoska, Szabolcs Smolna, and David Schmio. And David will be giving the lecture and will be joined by the others, possibly during the lecture, interjecting, but certainly for the Q&A at the end. So welcome everyone, and over to you.
Thank you for having the chance to present here, and now I will share my screen. Can you see that? Probably.
We can. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So mostly, if we have to design ourselves, we have a proper way, and mostly we use our name to describe what Paradigma means for us, what Ariadné means for us, and how these two notions came together in the architectural practice that we do. But now, since we've got a topic from Owen as to be part of this series, this Towards Another Architecture, then we decided to choose another way to introduce our praxis and our practice and the way what we do and how we do. Because obviously when we read through the little text that was sent to us by Owen, and obviously we went through the multiform and the opening text of the multiform written by Owen, we felt some points to which we can access, because in basically our architecture studio do two things. One is architectural design that we obviously cannot get rid of. This is the thing that we were trained for during our university years, and we are really eager to have the chance to design something and see it to be realized in a physical way. But on the other hand, we also, this is the way how we word it, we do architectural cultural management, which means that we care of anything that is happening in the field of architecture or happening in the network of architects, and try to manage it in a way and try to capitalize it somehow and to sell it for clients if they are interested in. This is how we have a lot of collaboration with the municipalities, whether if they have to manage their built heritage, or we have collaboration with cultural institutions. And if we have to got one sentence from this multiform text that was written by Owen, there is a little part that we really got us, this mischaracterization. Whatever happens these years in the young architecture scene, this mostly mischaracterized as postmodern revival, and was mischaracterized as postmodern revival. And this is the thing that we were really on this. So we are not theorists, we are not researchers of this topic, we are practicing architects, and we just see that something is happening in the European scene, or maybe the trans-European, transatlantic scene, that young architects find some sort of heritage that they haven't seen before or haven't experienced before, and somehow they are connected this way. But we were always afraid to use a word for this, or name this as a movement even, maybe because if you, right after you name something as multiform, for instance, people can decide whether we can join to this movement or cannot. But until you don't do this, most of these young architects can be seen as a group, as a network of emerging architects, which we really appreciated. And during our discussions with other architects from Europe, there was one key moment which was slightly common, or slightly appears in all these discussions, which we also have this experience, that Szabolcs Molnár, my colleague, was walking on the street a few years ago, almost at the beginning of the establishment of our studio, and find next to a trash bin, find a pile of Japan architects and architectural design from the 19th and the 18th, which probably was part of some architects' archive, but the family thrown it away after this guy died. And Szabolcs bring those copies to the studio, to our office space, and we opened these books and looked at it. And this is pretty an important key thing about, I think, this generational experience that we have, or as we can read this another architecture we are in these days, that there is a kind of architecture which happened before 1960, the modernist period of architecture, and the late modern period during the rebuilding of Europe after the Second World War, which is part of the canon, which you can learn in universities. And there is another kind of architecture from the 2000s, let's say, which is already online, and you can access to it through online, Art Daily or Design, or in such a forums. And there is a period between 70s and the 90s, which is not exist online and not easy to be accessed. Not easy to access, but only if you walk into the library and look at it, or if you have the archives from some other architects and you open these kind of Japan architect issues and you see that, oh my gosh, what kind of architecture happened here during the 90s and during the 80s? Why we did not know about this? And this has also happened with us with Hungarian architecture papers, which we opened and which we digged into, and which we were eager to collect all these publications and see what happened that time. And you know, there is an 18-year-old architect almost dying, not yet, would be good to have a discussion with him, and you see that, oh my gosh, what you did, we know what you did last summer. We saw that when you were a young architect, you created such an interesting things, and please tell stories about it. And this was a track that we were really on, and we really experienced this archivic approach to see what is the architecture of the 18th and the 19th, and it was really inspirational for us. And this is the circumstances in which Paradigma Ariadné came to life. So maybe this is a too very maybe we have too big face to place ourselves within such a great list, but in 2011, obviously, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, postmodernism was reintroduced again for a wider public. 2017, the Chicago Architecture Biennale did the Make New History topic, which already invited those architects who may be part of this movement, let's say, or the reconstructive exhibition, which was an important key exhibition in New York for us when we had the chance to run into it. or the Revisiting the Postmodernism book by Adam Nathaniel Fuhrman and Sir Terry Farrell. And there is a key text, or there is a text which we found pretty interesting in this thread from 2018 by Giacomo Palla, who was the first, as we saw in the columns of the Art Daily, who highlighted that maybe it's not a good thing to use postmodern revival to describe what is happening in a younger scene in the European architecture, because it's really lead us to a different path that is not matches with what is happening these days. And we wanted to, and we felt that okay, probably we are part of this. Probably we have a link to this. This is what is going on in Europe these days, and we try to connect ourselves to it in many levels. And now I'm going to introduce you the formats what we used to make it. And this is one refurbishment that we had the chance to design in downtown Budapest in a flat for a client who wanted to create a space out of two spaces that is not divided by a wall, but connected through doors. And we use this huge geometrical shape to create the illusion that these two separated spaces are almost one space and can be introduced as one space, the living room and the kitchen. And but finally it was rejected. The client said, okay, you're going to choose another design. But when we were thinking about that, we probably going to put this design on Instagram because this maybe could go viral because of its colors and the shapes. We also decided that, okay, let's do some extra material that maybe are able to create connections with other architects. And we just took these shelves and make a drawing out of these square-shaped shelves, and placed imaginary books on these shelves. Books like refers to how to get over the breakup of fashion architecture taste, which was a common topic between these young architects, or Adam Nathaniel Fuhrman, how he introduced his travelings and postings between Tokyo and London, or what advices Andrew Kovacs has to how to grow your own cactus. This happened around when Andrew introduced his wonderful installation at the Coachella Festival in Florida, around Los Angeles, and other formats through which we approach this kind of problem, or we try to thematize it. A conference that we organized together with Andrew Kovacs, together with Daniel Kovacs, our friend, an art historian, who together we finally did the curatorialship of the Hungarian Pavilion and Venice Architecture Biennale. This conference aimed to see what postmodern theories, practices, and histories happened in Central and Eastern Europe, where you found socialist countries during the 80s, before the change of the regime, and how this pretty capitalist architectural style appeared in a socialist environment. This presentation is available online if you're interested in what kind of postmodern architecture happened behind the Iron Curtain. I think it's a pretty interesting conference if you're interested in. And to this conference, we already invited some key players who we saw key players at that time about to introduce, and invited them to introduce their approach to this postmodern revival question, or even the appearance of the postmodern on the cultural field. So Andrew Kovacs from Studio OK, or Ana Luisa Soares from Fala, or Giacomo Palla again, were able to show how they think about their relation to postmodern architecture and their relation to architecture, what is happening now. Again, another format which was also a commission from a municipality, the city of Veszprém, who will be the European Capital of Culture in 2023. They invited us to organize an exhibition into an empty building of them, which they bought right before we were invited there, and they asked us to somehow help them to organize an exhibition into this building, which could celebrate that this building will be habited again after 30 years, because it was empty for 30 years and it was really in a bad condition. It was in decay. And what we figured out here is to invite young architects and ask them to try to design ornamentation and murals to the 12 walls of this building. And this is how we created some sort of celebration, but also an exhibition through which young architects were able to introduce their thoughts and ideas through murals, what they think about ornamentation these days. In the middle, you can see again a mural of Adam Netanyahu Furman, but on the right you can see a wall which was designed by the MNPL workshop from Ukraine. Really crazy Ukrainian guys do really nice design. And many other architects were invited to this exhibition, which was series of room where each of wall was decorated by different young and emerging architects that time. And even in this case, we were trying to not name this group of architects and try to not describe them as some movement, only just to introduce them that they are emerging architects in Europe, and they have a lot of things to say about how to ornament again walls, which was somehow obviously not a thing before. And hence this exhibition was pretty successful, especially teenagers adored it and went there to create Instagram images and selfies there. The city again invited us 1 year later to a socialist housing estate to introduce an open-air exhibition there. It was right before the Corona, but somehow it was Corona. It was an open-air exhibition, yeah, let's say. And for that, we applied the theory of Aldo Rossi, and the urban monument, what we thought that is pretty missing from this housing estate. So if you consider this socialist housing estate, or even not socialist one, but capitalist housing estate in Western Europe, these city parts was not real cities in the term that they had no history. I mean, they had no past. Mostly they were fields, which was part of the agricultural production. And during the 60s, the city decided that, okay, let's do housing estate here. And it was designed in 5 years and realized in 10 years, and they just exploded into the present at that time. And there was no layers, historical layers even, which would create that feeling that most of the cities have. And to this environment, we invited 4 architects, 3 architects and ourselves as well. This is a strategy on our side to create exhibition and place ourselves in between them. And Poinsetry, Mayo from Spain, and Super Void architects from Italy had the chance to introduce their approach, what they think, what is missing from this housing estate, what kind of urban monument could be introduced in the empty voids of these public spaces of this socialist housing estate environments. Point Supreme said that what is completely missing from modernist architecture is the representation of body. I mean, historical architecture is full of bodies and essays and arms all around the buildings as building parts and ornamentation. But in socialist housing estates, you cannot see one face or cannot see one full body. And this is the thing what the exhibition targeted. And like our contribution to this was the 4th monument, and this is reflected on what I described before, that in socialist housing estate there is no time in the term of layers. And what if we bring there a strange object which refers to a ruin that seems like was there for ages, but it's orange, so it's completely fake one. And through this we had a lot of discussion in the studio, and through this many topics was able to be introduced in this exhibition, because also an audio guide was done for this, and people still able to visit the haskovo.eu site, and you can, even in English, you can listen what kind of textual extras and audio guide was applied in this open-air exhibition that we did here. And this year, Attila Robert-Csóka, my founder partner, was invited as a visiting lecturer at the Metropolitan University of Budapest, and there again we tried to teach contemporary architecture, and at contemporary architecture we meant Fala Atelier, Fosbury Collective, and Palma from Mexico, and they had the chance to introduce their approach to what they think about contemporary architecture and what they do. And And from this little introduction, which was not a regular one, how we do it, because mostly, as I told you, we introduce our name and our approach through that. But I think through this little interaction and our relation to this another architecture, what we can see in Europe and in the United States, maybe it's clear that we do design projects, we do curatorial projects, and we have editorial projects, and we also do teaching. So this is the mix of architecture that we are producing, but these things are not really divided. So this is the map of our projects since 5 years that we have, and on this we try to introduce what project was connected. So what cultural management project was connected to design projects, and how our thinking went through. So how Pomostroika conference leads to the Adernity Biennale that soon I'm going to introduce, and how this exhibition, which is connected by a blue triangle, are key part of our activity, and how it's helped us, our design processes somehow in the past. And as we are a young studio, but as we are getting, tomorrow we're going to be 6 years old, we are slightly leaving this young term, or slightly leaving this emerging part of thing, because we are a proper capitalist company now these days, and we have to earn money and so on. So we are trying to reach out for proper clients. But at the beginning, obviously, we were part of this festival architecture and building workshop architecture, and we have there was some cultural institution who were brave enough to invite architects to design something for them, which is a new thing, and with which they can experience. They can experiment. So here you can see the slanted house in the left top image, which we designed for the 100 Sparks Art Week. This project I'm going to introduce in detail. Or we have the photo booth Pantheon on the right top, which is a Pantheon and the photo booth as well, what people could use to create Instagrammable images. As being part of Pantheon, it's more like a machine-like thing, or the installation on the left bottom, which was introduced in Concentrico Festival in Spain. I don't need to be too fast. Help me please. What is the name? Concentrico Festival. What is the name of the installation? San Bartolome hat. Sorry, I forgot the name of the thing that we designed. Somehow it's happened. So the San Bartolome hat, which was a mixture of a archaic form that we imagined as an archaic form and textual representations of atmospheres of buildings and atmospheres of built environment, which you were able to read represented on the form of this tent-like hut shape. And in France, the French Institute of Budapest was not the first client of us, but almost the first client who invited us to design for them a proper outdoor furniture system, which is a bar table and a stool that refers to the French Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And what I'm going to do, introduce details, is 3 projects. Maybe I still have a little time for that. Is the slanted house, which honestly we designed because in Hungary we got this critique that we are the new postmodern guys, and we were like, okay, this we heard many times. Maybe we are bored of it. Let's give a try to another architecture style, and let's dive into something else, because maybe we are able to introduce that. Mostly we are simply machines that you take something and you put into the machine, and some things will come out which will be architecture. And this has happened with here as well. This installation is reflective to the critical regionalism of idea of Kenneth Frampton, because he has this 5 point of the architecture of resistance, and the 4th point is about the topography, how building can be reflective, the topography. And the key example for this is obviously the Boanova tea house by Álvaro Siza, which is pretty reflective to the rocks where it's placed in Portugal. But if you enter the building, a critical regionalized building, let's say, and then you experience that the floor is even. It's if there's rocks around the building, you don't have to walk on the rocks, but there's a concrete floor where you can sit and you can live. And we were thinking about, okay, let's make a bit radical, or let's complete the critical regionalism. What if you enter a building which is on a slope? Also, the building itself is sloped. The floor is also sloped. Then you can walk slowly, and you cannot really stand on properly. And this is the slanted house that we designed for this art festival, obviously. So it's not a proper building that you can live. But on the other hand, we also thought that it would be funny to design a building which has a slanted floor inside. And on one hand, this is over theoretized architecture that refers to Kenneth Frampton's essay from 80s. But on the other hand, and which we really appreciate and which we really like to do, to design a kind of architecture that has multiply levels to access. So if you are children and you enter this building and you would like to have fun, you can, because it's slanted, it's super funny. My daughter was super happy to run up and down and enjoy the slope, how to run down the slope, because it was super funny. And obviously, who not interested in Kenneth Frampton at all and critical regionalism at all, they don't have to care about it. They only have to enjoy the pleasure which this building could give. And I think this is some sort of extra that we are always search for, this kind of pleasure. We would like to give pleasure to clients with architecture, which sounds a bit perverted, but we really have this approach. This is the extra part. But if they don't want to, and if they want a simple building, we can do that. But if we can have fun in the building, which they could enjoy, that's cool. And for that we are pretty open. Another project, which is also a realized one, the Rural Geometries project, which is recently published in the Architectural Review, Animal issue, the latest one, which is an educational trail, a buffalo barn, and a series of hideaways in the reeds, but also a recultivation project of a land which was previously, ages before, it was a swamp, but now it's covered with reeds. And with the help of buffaloes, will be recultivated into a swamp again. Hence, birds will be able to return to this place and have their things, what mostly birds do in swamps. And this design has a mega narrative that we applied here, which has three core statements. One is the contemporary landscape that we have with all these agricultural productional elements that now you can find on countryside, probably in England as well. All these silos, all these metallic shapes all around the countryside that you can see if you pass by on the road by car. All these materials and clashes of different buildings from different age, how they were placed next to each other, which was only served to serve a proper agricultural production, but not even a composition that was designed in a way, or this kind of meets huge silos again and huge buildings that was for machines to keep things inside. And this really got our mind that this is something pretty nice, this geometrical purity and beauty. And on the other hand, if we look back in history, how the rural areas of a country was, like the big plain where this Sándorfalva educational trail is, it was obviously habited by these cowboys or goat boys, shepherds, thank you, shepherds, who built themselves these kind of, as we call it, szárnyék, places where they could hide away from the wind and the rain even. And it was pretty inspiring to see that this kind of geometrical composition of this circles and shapes also appeared in this kind of architecture, and especially and also in industrialized agricultural production. So this is how somehow meet in our mind, and we built on this the concept. And the third part of this creation that we have during our discussion or during the design process is the Renaissance as a reference, which was the first age when people realized that landscape exists and there is a thing that we can see beauty in, and see that how beautiful the landscape is in itself, and find beauty in it, and even we can frame it, and somehow with framing we can give pleasure or more or extra pleasure with these processes. And this is all, we try to mix it, and this is the swamp, or not the swamp, but the reeds at the condition today. And this is how it will be changed. This is the trail, as you can see, a 500-meter long path around a 500-meter circle of with a 500-meter radius. And this is a tricky image, because on this you can see that this is supposed to be a bit bigger, but somehow, thanks to the budget, we have to reduce the design. But on this path you can find the buffalo barn, 3 hideaways, and little buildings to sit in and enjoy the reeds. And at the end you can see a lookout tower. And this is the barn, as we on an image. And on this you can see how we use this materiality of silos and the shapes of silos on purpose, because this part is highlighting where you can enter to the barn. This is one hideaway that is framing the nature from inside. This is how you can look out from this kind of wooden building to the barn, and how it looks like in the reeds. This is the third way how we did it. And obviously, if we have the chance to design 3 different kind of wooden object, we're not going to design one simple window for all of this wooden structure, but we're going to apply 3. That's why we have this kind of windows, and the circular window, and the Gothic shape window as well. And then the final point of the trail is the lookout tower. And this is how it's going on. In the future, the environment will change, obviously, because the buffaloes will destroy the reed, actually, and the swamp will be a swamp. And all the quality of the architecture is pretty raw, which we really enjoy. I mean, this is a detail that was consulted with the carpenters many times, and it becomes some details that we are really happy with. Maybe it's not the best or not the nicest way how metal and wood can meet, but on the other hand, it really fits to that kind of aesthetic, which was really a part of this countryside during when shepherds lived here, and they built things themselves. And this is how it looks in the winter. We constantly photo shooting it and looking at it, how it looks like, the barn from the back. Here you can see that the silo which hits through this barn is a part through which people can look into the barn and see how buffaloes are in. And this is the inside of one hideaway that people can visit. We are pretty happy with this, because we designed it 5 years ago, and now it's realized last year. So actually this is the first big project that we executed. And 2 other projects maybe if I still have time to introduce. This is not all of them finished properly. We're still in search. Like this one, the Cuvarian style, which is a handbook. It has a strange title. Soon you're going to understand why. Because this piece was produced to the Biennale that we curated together with Daniel Kovac. He is the guy who is the art historian of us, and we mostly work together with him. pretty useful for all the architecture studios to have a friend who is an art historian or architecture historian, because he has a lot of knowledge about architecture and art. And this exhibition at the Biennale in the Hungarian Pavilion introduced 12 modernist buildings from the post-war period of Budapest. Modernist buildings that are in danger, probably will be demolished in the future, because now the condition or how people treat these modernist buildings, or how the Hungarians think about their built modernist heritage, not really good, because this is declared as communist architecture, or architecture which was done by the oppressing Russian power. But this is not true, because it was designed by Hungarian architects, and this is part of our cultural heritage. So in one room we introduced 12 modernist buildings of Budapest, and for each building we invited one architect from the region, from Central and Eastern European region, young and emerging architect, and asked them to reflect on these buildings, not to find solution for them, but to find some sort of narrative which they can introduce to a piece, to an art piece, to an art object, what they think about this building, what they think, how it could be interpreted, how it could be understood, how it could be transformed in the future. And the building that we got, and because we also will take part of this exhibition as an exhibitor as well, this is a strategy on our side still. We got the Déli railway station, the southern railway station of Budapest, which is a building from the 70s or the 80s, sorry, designed by György Kőváry, who was a modernist architect who died in 82 or 81, I cannot remember properly, and designed other great buildings of Budapest, mostly related to transportation. This is another station, a metro station building that he designed, already demolished. This has a pretty impressive orange color, which is not visible on this image. And the Scala metro store, which is in the downtown Budapest, which has really this dark glass on it. And we observed the Déli railway station and the whole area, southern railway station, and we soon realized that this building is in danger as well, because the land is pretty valuable under it, and maybe in the future there is a chance that a new city part will be designed and will be built on the land of the Déli railway station, and the station will be took away to some part, to other part of the city. And we said that this would be the worst case in the term of built heritage protection. I mean, this is part of our history. This is a wonderful building, the Déli railway, the southern railway station should be protected, but it's not protected because the state don't want to protect it, and even they would like to destroy. They would be happy to see it is destroyed. And as young architect, what possibilities you have if you face this kind of situation, that there's a building that you adore and it will be destroyed? And this is the worst case scenario heritage management that we figured out, which is somehow applying the idea how Palladian motif came to life. So Palladio was an Italian architect. He designed the Palladian motif, and this motif lives through all the history of architecture and even can be applied today in a building which is not designed by Palladio, but if you apply this motif, that will be called Palladian motif, and you could pass on a heritage of an architect without having the material of the building itself. And this is what we did. That's why we decided to let's do a handbook. Observe these buildings, the Déli southern railway station, the Scala metro store, and the Köki terminal, and analyze them, try to understand its stylistic features if they have one, spatial features if they have, ornamentation if they have, and all these questions that are related to architecture, and use this analysis to create a handbook through which you can apply the style of György Kőváry, which is one unique architect in the Hungarian architecture history, and create buildings that could refer to the Déli, could refer to the Köki terminal, and could refer to Scala metro, the formal circumstances of the Scala metro store. And so this building has three parts. One is the the analysis part, which is the tough part, because it's pretty hard to analyze modernist architecture with the tools of how historical architecture is analyzed. There's a part which is about formal studies, to introduce it very easily, how you can apply these things if there's a conclusion in the book. And there is a case study through which we introduce new buildings in the field of the Southern Railway Station. That is some sort of statement that, okay, you can destroy the building of György Kőváry, but if you do it, you're going to get it back dozen buildings of György Kőváry and the huge skyscraper even in the style of Kőváry, which refers to the Köki Terminal, and two other buildings which refers to Déli, and the third one which refers to the Scala Metro building store. And this is the renderings that we produced in this book and introduced as a sort of way to pass on an architect's heritage. And you know, here it meets with the real estate developer point of view, because if there's a city part, probably practicing architects know it, which will be developed by a real estate developer, and you are invited to design one building there as an architect. You're going to get a handbook through which you have, with what style you have to apply if you're going to design a building there, because the real estate developer has a vision what kind of Swedish architecture or kind of minimalist architecture he would be happy to see. And we said, okay, if this kind of format exists, then why don't create some handbook that pass on an architect's heritage and design a Kővárian quartier in the field of the Déli railway station. And this is how the book looks like. This is now the state of it. It's an art piece. It was exhibited once or twice. It was exhibited in Biennale 2017, and it was exhibited in the Ludwig Museum a few months ago. And now we're searching for a publisher who together with maybe we can introduce this book for a wider public. And the last project, which is also an unfinished project, but we introduced because it's the newest one, which we're pretty happy with. This is the No Place House series. That is a project funded by us and financially funded by the Hungarian Academy of Arts, where we won a scholarship to create this project, which is a design and cultural project on one way, and a teaching platform on the other, and the portfolio building as well. Through this project, our aim is to create buildings which are. So we have this experience in the studio that we have way more ideas than possibilities to introduce those ideas. I mean, we have this experience that during the night we are sleeping next to the child, we are almost die, but then on the other hand, our brain is making an idea of a building that we would like to design, and it came to our mind that, oh my gosh, in the morning you realize that, oh yeah, I have an idea about a building that I would like to design. It would be cool to do that. And this is not related to a specific spot. This is not related to a specific part of the city. This is only a conceptual idea of a building that you feel the wish that you would like to design, and maybe a client will come to the studio. You try to show this idea to them, and this is the ideas that we started to collect, and this is how No Place Houses project came to life. For instance, this house was the 642 building, which was an idea that we came to a conclusion that would be super cool to design a building that is a 6 by 6 meters square on a top with a 4 by 4 meter square and a 2 by 2 meter square. And let's design through this building and try to apply those features that we observed in the early period of modernism, where these modernist villas was realized outskirts of the city, in the middle of nowhere, where the surrounding environment was not really important, only the building itself and the conceptual statement of the building itself. That's why all these buildings has a conceptual statement through which this building is created, and that's why it's pretty not introduced how it's related to its how it relates to its environment, because it's not important in the case of a building. It's a conceptual one, like this one, which which we felt that would be, this is a textile that is pretty common in Hungary. Grandmothers mostly use it for cover their tables and use as curtains. And what if we see this image, this childish representation of a building, and take it serious and try to design a building which looks like a building from this textile? And this is how this house of a textile came to life, which is an optical illusion. Obviously, this is a triangle-shaped building with a proper courtyard in it, but from three sides, it seems like a one building as itself. But from other angles, it obviously this illusion is broken. And this is the series that now we are working on, and we're going to produce 9 buildings each year, and end of the year we're going to introduce it in an exhibition, hopefully somewhere where we're going to have the chance. And this project going to for 3 years now, so 3 exhibitions we're going to introduce, and 9 buildings will be introduced in each exhibition. So this is the projects of Paradigma, Ariadné, 2 finished one and 2 which is an ongoing one. So you had the chance to look into what kind of processes is going on in the studio, which is us basically. And this here you can see Szabolcs Molnár, Attila, Robert Csóka, and me, and all our colleagues who work together with us these days. And in this image, we are standing on the lookout tower that we designed for Sándorfalva. Thank you very much for for this presentation and for the possibility to introduce ourselves.
Thank you very much. Amazing talk and amazing projects. Just, yeah, incredibly energizing watching all of that and hear you talk about that. So we have a little bit of time for some questions and discussion. So if anyone watching would like to submit a question, please do so in the chat, and we will come and unmute you, and you'll be able to ask it directly to our speakers. Because the chat is empty currently, I get the opportunity to ask a few things, or make a few kind of comments in response. I was I was interested in that the quote you extracted from the multiform introduction about the sort of the mischaracterization as postmodern revival. And this is something that, you know, I've writing that text, I've kind of dealt with. Well, you know, why is it not postmodern revival? What is postmodern revival? Isn't it just postmodernism? How would you answer that? Like, you know, why? I mean, I sort of think I have a sense of what the answer might be, but why is it that what you do is not postmodern revival? And why do you feel it's so important to make that distinction?
Well, a good question. Well, that's why I said that it's a pretty fragile thing to say that there is a sort of movement with a name, because we also, as a young architecture firm, you are in search for styles, especially, you know, we are 3 architects. We have one common background through which we design buildings, but have different ideas maybe in different things. And if we have this stamp that we are postmodern revival architects, then it's really in one category. And maybe we don't want to be simply in that category, but maybe Szabolcs and Attila could have an answer. It's why I don't say that we reject the postmodern revival notion. We just felt that it's not fulfilling what is happening these days. So it's not simply that we found our grandfathers and see what they do, but on the other hand, there is medial questions about it, all this boom of Instagram, which was funny at the beginning, but now our eyes are bleeding sometimes because so many things are happening. Yeah, mostly. This is what I can react.
Yeah, maybe I would just add something here, because I think we should make, we should make a distinction between between, if we speak about postmodernism, that usually we have to make the distinction with as a style and as a method. And I think in Hungary, a lot of times, or usually, they would like to push us into the interpretation as a stylish accomplishment. I think what we would like to what we like to follow, or we certainly would like to go with the path as a method. And I think it was pretty clear or obvious that all of the projects that we showed, that David showed, that the very handful bouquets of references and think and methods of how we should interpret the architecture is extremely diverse. So we are not on one kind of path that is really like going in the infinity, and that's the postmodern path. But we really like to embrace and internalize a lot of things, and I think in that level, or in that sense, we are kind of relate as a postmodern method, because we are not really rejecting everything. So we would like to consider and take as seriously as it possible, even if it's like a reference of literature, reference of a really pop cultural reference, or taking seriously as a historical or rural reference, if it like. I don't want to like emphasize the reference thing, because it's another topic, and maybe it's another mistake to overuse this word, but just the interpretation and the method, I think we are really like to be as free as it possible. And I think in this level we are similar.
Just to add some notes, what Szabolcs and David already told, that all what we do has different roots. For instance, the latest one, the No Place houses, as we started to analyze what we do, we just realized that in many aspects it has more like a Bauhaus or modernistic roots, but the results, because of the richness of colors or shapes and everything, it reminds us to the postmodern era. But on the other hand, I just have a story. David, 10 years ago, just applied for a grant to make a research on the topic of the Hungarian postmodernist architecture, which back then was rejected and finally was not realized. And since then, the whole Hungarian postmodern architecture is not researched, not published at all, or only in archives. So maybe we don't have this kind of knowledge to describe the differences or the similarities. But in general, I think what it was written by you, the pluralism of this whole period is more like the attribute which was not in the postmodern period, as we think about postmodernism as an architectural style, a closed period. Yep.
Yeah, but for instance, if you, I'm sorry. So if you place, I mean, we refer to Ariadné so many times because we have some relation to him, because of we invited many times him, and what the architecture he does is slightly different than what we do, because it's way more harsh and more colorful than the ours. But somehow we feel the relation and feel also the, I don't know, the way how he feels about the contemporary architecture, how it's restricted somehow. I think this is some key issue, that we see some restrictions in generations above us, and we would like to be free to apply whatever we would like to apply, and make our restrictions for ourselves, not because of some kind of dogma or some kind of pushed idea on ourselves, I think.
How would you define those sort of restrictions? Because it's a really kind of fascinating thing, because looking at say Charles Jenks in ad hocism before he, you know, the language of postmodernism. You know, there's a very obvious target, and it's a little bit of a straw man, but it is the sort of Messian steel and glass, ubiquitous. He saw as ubiquitous international modernism, and what he proposed in ad hocism was obviously a radical departure from this. It was its antithesis. But obviously now we don't have that the ubiquity of Messian steel and glass. So if we do, it's kind of it operates in a rather different way. But how do you see those restrictions that other aspects of architectural culture are operating within? How are they aesthetic? Are they to do with the relationship between architect and client, the types of projects that are that they're sort of expressed through? How do you see it?
Well, do you have Szabolcs?
I don't know if I have an answer on that. I would just like to I wanted to point out a really interesting coincidence that at the very beginning, that what you read about the office, that what is the manifesto of the office, is basically the second manifesto, and the first manifesto was a really complicated and very, very well constructed manifesto that we said, and basically it was that the Paradigma Ariadné is a studio unrestricted either by means or dimensions, and it, I think, at a certain point we really didn't. So we came to a conclusion that basically even ourselves not really understand, but what it really means that being unrestricted should be mean. And by that I mean, as David just showed all the formats that we wanted to express ourselves, I think we consider this all the formats and all the mediums as really equally to represent and interpret the architectural idea that we would like to share, or we like to form and manifest. And in this case, I think we wouldn't restrict ourselves. The restriction usually came from like an urge to be really present and being a little bit ahead that we can see and experience in our environment and in our everydays. And this is the kind of the drive and the flow that usually make a restriction, that what can go above that bar and what stays below, and it's not going to happen and not being formed as an architectural idea or a building or a proposal or even just a plan. So yeah, I don't know if it makes sense or not.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I think these restrictions are, so for instance, for us, anything goes mostly, or we are happy to digest everything. Ornamentation. This is a topic that is, if you put it into a discussion in Hungary, in public discussion, people will be like, ooh, ornamentation, I don't know, it's pretty. We can remember the postmodern time when it was accepted. It's mostly a statement about ornamentation, for instance. But on the other hand, it appears and we like it. Visual pleasure. This is also a key thing that we are interested in, how to create pleasing surfaces in architecture that could create enjoyment for people. And this is not the way as we see for instance, what we can clearly see, the Hungarian architecture scene is open to maybe, or yeah, if it's an answer for your question, but I don't know. But I would be curious, why would you like to make distinction between postmodern revival and multiform? So what you see differences in the Indeed. I mean, obviously, you describe in the text what is your opinion about it and how it's related to economic circles and so on. But
yeah, well, well, I mean, that text there, I kind of, when I talk about it, whilst people ask about it, I sort of describe there being two aspects to it. There's one where it's essentially doing that thing that I think you were rightly quite cautious about, of putting a label onto something. It's trying to put one's finger on something that's happening in architectural culture that's manifested in lots of practices in lots of places in lots of different ways, and being conscious of what the effect of putting a label on something can do. You can kill it basically, but you can also do it in a way that is sort of generative and productive, that can perhaps even foster more connections and more synergy. So it was done with that aspiration in mind. Whether it's achieved that or anything is another question entirely. But then the second bit, as you kind of allude to, there was an attempt, which is probably more speculative, to connect this to because I'm trained as an art historian, architecture historian, so I want to see these connections, these relationships between architecture and a political, economic, technological moment. And having thought a lot about postmodernism, I mean, postmodernism is very obviously the architectural manifestation of this moment of transition, the condition of post-modernity and shift to post-industrial economies, technologies of reproduction, rather than, that familiar story. And I was thinking, given that postmodernism is essentially now half a century old, which was the same age of modernism when postmodernism kind of first really appeared properly. Is there a way of making a similar thing? Can we see this in relation to an attempt to make sense of an equivalent moment of political economic transition? How one then connects these things is another question. But that was the idea. So implicit in that is the idea that multiform is different to postmodernism, because if postmodern architecture responded to a kind of that moment in the 70s and early 80s to some extent, this is a response to something that's taking place nearly 50 years later. But then, in terms of, well, how does one look at it? One needs to think about, I guess, the kind of the different tactics, design approaches and strategies, and those commonalities. Is that something that is universal, or is it because of this generational thing of looking again at these things? And I think that what you described, I was really intrigued actually by your point about there being this gap in sort of recent history of how modernism is in history books. And from the kind of 2000s onwards, it's online. there's an online archive that exists on the Zine, for example, or Arch Daily. But then there's this vacuum of this absence, which is really fascinating. I remember hearing, I think, Sean Griffiths talking about how, and maybe this was a revision of FAT's origins to some extent, but how they would sort of scour charity shops for like old copies of architectural design that had been chucked out in the sort of mid 90s, because they were sort of seen as, there's as Sean also talks about this Dan Graham quote about there's nothing more toxic than what was recently fashionable, and it's that sort of thing of what was very recently fashionable suddenly becomes utterly kind of repellent to everyone, and they were kind of embracing this stuff because they were interested in what it could do ultimately. and how it would probably wind other people up, and they certainly succeeded in doing that. But I think that extends then into the 90s itself in a funny way, which is comparatively undocumented and is sort of maligned, certainly in this country. So these generational things are quite interesting, but I think it's that kind of culture of pluralism that I think is ultimately the for me the sort of multiforms connections to postmodernism. It's yes, it's to some extent there are clear echoes and descendancies between postmodernism and multiform, but more broadly, it's what it means for an architectural culture that is free, that is not bound to any particular style or approach or mentality, but can accommodate lots of different ones simultaneously. And for me, that's what multiform represents. It's a thing, but it's also an argument for an architectural culture of that nature. That's a really long, rambling answer to your question.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's something in it.
Yeah, I think in a way I pretty understand your approach to this, because obviously it's not simply just a postmodern architecture is interesting in our time, but modernist even. So this is part of the whole field that we are interested in, and how we can be inspired by this architecture is we don't separate them. The postmodernism is funny, it's colorful and thing, but the modernism also has its qualities that we are happy to apply and happy to live with. That's so I think this is how it differs, because postmodernism was against modernism. It was very very attacking, actually, the modernist approach, and especially the late period of modernism in the 60s and the 70s. But for us, this is also part of the history. That's how we are open to create a style out of a modernist architect who never ever thought that what he do is a stylist, has stylistic features probably, but we fake it and we try to do it, and maybe it could work in this way as well. Yeah.
I've got another question.
Okay.
I sadly didn't make it to Venice last year, so I didn't get to see the exhibition, but I certainly read about it, and I was really fascinated about it in a number of ways. But I wanted to talk about it in terms of climate crisis and how architecture's role in that, because one of the sort of striking things about British architectural culture at the moment is and I guess this extends internationally as well, is there's obviously the very understandable and important need to sort of think about what the carbon implications of building is, but also a kind of discussion about embodied carbon and a kind of growing sort of retro first movement. So which was a kind of presumption in favor of refurbishment rather than demolition, because of the need to preserve the carbon that's embodied in existing buildings.
Yeah.
And I'm very sympathetic to that, but I'm skeptical about how successful that call is going to be, because it seems to me it's one-dimensional. It's purely about the carbon impact, whereas ultimately there is a broader question about how to make that process meaningful, how to, I think, as you describe the Venice project, create new narratives for these buildings. And so much of this is going to be about the legacy of modernism, of the architectural manifestations of what we think of those years, the decades of modernity and the transformations to cities across the world with massive bits of concrete infrastructure, which frankly are not going anywhere because it's just unfeasible. So I was interested in the extent to which that aspect was in your thinking for that exhibition, and what your kind of broader reflections might be on, I guess, in shorthand, a kind of multi-form approach to retrofit and to reimagining existing buildings. Because for me, that's a potentially incredibly fertile and important aspect of it.
Well, yeah, this climate crisis was at the beginning when we started to think about the curatorial concept of the Ariadné exhibition in Venice Biennale. This climate crisis was part of, because we introduced this generation, which who are in between the two worlds. One, let's say, a collapsing capitalism, which we cannot really see how we collapse, maybe will be, and a brighter future if we are clever. And then in this term, in this relation, we have this socialist architecture pieces all around the city, out of concrete and so on, with which we do two things mostly. One is that we destroy them without even think about the climatic questions about how it's bad to destroy a building these days. Or the other thing is that we heat insulating them and make it efficient in a way of energy according to an energetic question and so on. And these are the two endpoints. With none of them we are happy if we consider the architectural qualities of these buildings. Why we see that probably the second version is better, to keep them and use them in the future. But on the other hand, our ask was to these designers from this region to introduce a spectrum in between these endpoints. So if we say that, so we say goodbye to a building, how we can do it in a way which is not I don't know, climate friendly, because maybe it's not going to happen, but culturally, how we can say that it's that we can say goodbye properly. Or if reuse it for something else, how it could relate it to the history of the building itself. So if there was a store in which furniture was sold, how it could be turned into, and furniture is about the pleasure of the body, because you can sit on and could have relaxing furniture, how it could be turned to other pleasures and could be introduced a store as a new building of I don't know, bath of pleasures and so on. But how this curatorial concept was going on, this approach to give answers for the future of these buildings was finally not really part of the exhibition. The introduced solutions or introduced ideas mostly concentrated on the building, the qualities of the building itself, how we could have the public and make them understood that these buildings are part of our heritage, these buildings has qualities somehow and could be understood in a way. This would be my answer. So this is, yeah. But the multiform, as I see, is a kind of solution. So probably anyhow, this climate crisis will hit cities, for instance, probably huge infrastructure changing will be. And for that, I think it's good that it has some kind of pluralistic style that are able to humanize this infrastructural changing. I mean, if we have to apply huge towers that will, I don't know, reduce the carbon dioxide in the air, then those towers has to look somehow. And if it will be pure infrastructure, then it will be ugly, like a highway is ugly. But if we have the chance to design it in a way which is user-friendly, then I think I see a point in this.
It's really interesting. I think, you know, in a way, it's the cultural meaning of the building, almost that's an easier argument in a way. If you can do that, then everything else follows in, doesn't it, really, ultimately?
Yeah.
That's we've run over, so I need to, as much as I'd like to keep talking, to draw things to a close. Thank you, all three of you, so much. We pick up the series again next Wednesday with Afena de Jong, who leads the Amsterdam-based architectural agency at Farrell, and she's also contextual design that also leads the contextual design MA department at Design Academy Eindhoven, and whose research project, The Multiplicity of Other, was actually at the Dutch Pavilion at the most recent Venice Architecture Biennale. So please do join us then. But for the moment, please join me in thanking David, Shalbox, and Attila for a really stimulating evening. Thank you.